The year 1860. A Frenchman carves his way through a tropical jungle in the heart of Asia. Insects swarm everywhere, and towering trees stretch endlessly into the sky. Suddenly, he stops in front of a massive stone wall cutting through the forest. Giant stone faces smile at him from the roots. Towers rise toward the heavens, covered in moss and vines. A whole city, with no roads, no people, abandoned in the heart of the jungle. This isn't a movie. It's real. It exists today in Cambodia, and its name is Angkor. And the question that haunts me, why did they leave it? This was the largest city on Earth, bigger than anything in Europe, bigger than anything in China, bigger than anything humanity had built up to that point. A city home to nearly 1 million people, at a time when the rest of the world was just scattered villages. Then, one day, they all left and never returned. They abandoned their homes, their temples, their palaces. They left everything behind and vanished. No one knows why, and the strangest part, this civilization left us not a single word to explain what happened. No books, no letters, no stories, nothing. Just stones, just smiling faces. All we have is the testimony of one man, a Chinese traveler who visited the city just before its death. He wrote down everything he saw and returned to his homeland. 135 years later, no one was left. 135 years, just like that, 1 million people disappeared. What happened? Was it war, a natural disaster, or something stranger? Tonight, we open this file. We go back 1,200 years. We'll see how this empire began and what happened in those final 135 years. Asia's greatest secret, the Khmer Empire, the city swallowed by the jungle. If you're hearing this in the morning, go make yourself a cup of coffee. And if you're new here, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss us next time. Chapter 1, The City at its Peak. 196 AD, a Chinese ship sails down the Mekong River, one of Asia's greatest rivers, so wide in places that you can't even see the opposite bank. On board is a man named Zhou Daguan. Zhou wasn't an explorer or a merchant. He was a diplomat, an official envoy from the court of the Emperor of China, sent on a mission to the mysterious Khmer kingdom in the south. His task was simple: go, observe, and write a report on everything you see. He had no idea his report would become the only surviving document of this civilization 700 years later. The ship sailed for weeks. The jungle on either side was thick, green, and humid. Strange sounds echoed from the depths, birds he'd never heard, animals he'd never seen. The heat was suffocating. The humidity clung to his skin. Then, after weeks of sailing, he began to see something. Stone towers rising above the trees, not just one, but dozens. Zhou Daguan stepped off the ship and walked toward the city. When he entered, he froze. What lay before him was beyond anything he could have imagined. The city was enormous, not just big, but so vast it was almost impossible to comprehend. Walls stretched endlessly, and colossal gates, each adorned with a massive stone face, smiled down at him. The roads were wide and paved with stone, and the people, they were everywhere. Zhou was from China, the greatest empire in the world at the time. He had seen Beijing, the Chinese palaces, true grandeur, but he had never seen anything like this. He wrote in his report, "The royal palace is breathtaking in its splendor. The towers are covered in gold. The bridges lined with statues of giants holding enormous serpents. The temples are countless." But what shocked him more than the buildings was the king. Zhou arrived during a royal procession, and the Khmer king emerged in all his glory. Listen to his exact words. The king rides out of the palace on a white elephant, its tusks wrapped in gold. Guards with golden spears surround him, and girls carry burning candles, even in broad daylight, because candles are always lit in the king's presence. Behind him, ministers and princes ride smaller elephants, followed by horse-drawn chariots and hundreds of concubines in silk robes, flowers in their hair. The people on either side bow until their foreheads touch the ground. No one lifts their head until the entire procession has passed. Zhou asked a local, "Who is this man?" The answer was strange. "This is not a man, this is the God King." This concept was alien to China. In China, the emperor was called the Son of Heaven, but he was still human. Here, in the Khmer kingdom, it was different. The king was not just a ruler, he was a living god. He walked, he spoke, he ruled. This changed Zhou's understanding of everything he saw. The grand temples weren't just places of worship, they were the homes of a living deity. The gold wasn't for luxury or boasting, it was a sacred offering to the god. The people's absolute submission wasn't fear of a ruler, it was worship of a god walking among them. Zhou spent a full year in Angkor, walking its streets, asking questions, and recording everything. He wrote about markets that opened every day from 6 a.m. to noon, with no permanent shops. Vendors simply laid out their goods on the ground. Then he wrote something that stunned him. The strange thing is, most of the merchants are women. In China, men controlled everything, but here, women dominated the markets. He wrote about the food. Rice is abundant, harvested 3 times a year. Fish from the Great Lake, Tonle Sap, never run out. The fruits are strange. I've never seen their like in China. He described the houses. Common homes are made of wood and thatch, but even the poorest house has a ladder because the homes are raised off the ground to avoid floods and animals. He noted the cleanliness. People bathe several times a day. Even the king bathes in a sacred pool every morning. To them, cleanliness is a form of worship. He wrote about the royal harem. The king has 5 principal queens, each with her own palace, and thousands of concubines and servants. He described the punishments. Theft is punished by cutting off a hand or foot, sometimes both. Treason is punished by death, either buried alive or thrown to the crocodiles. He wrote about the religion. They worship strange gods. Their statues are everywhere. The priests wear yellow like Buddhists, but their rituals are different. But what amazed Zhou most was the great temple, Angkor Wat. He described it. A mile from the city stands a temple unlike any other. 5 towers rise toward the sky, their walls carved with thousands of images. A moat surrounds it on all sides. They told me it took more than 30 years to build, and the king who started it died before its completion. Zhou stood before Angkor Wat, gazing at the 5 towers reaching for the heavens, at the thousands of meters of carved stone, stories of gods, kings, and battles, and at the sacred pool where the priests bathed. Then he asked a simple question. Who built this? They replied, the gods. He pressed, no, who really built it? They said, our ancient kings, but the story is very long. Zhou never heard the full story. He wrote his report, boarded his ship, returned to China, and died a few years later. But his account survived. Thanks to him, we know what Angkor was like. Its streets, its markets, its people, its king. We know how it was before it vanished. But the question Zhou asked, who built this, deserves an answer. A long answer, one that begins 500 years before his visit. In a time when there was no empire, no Angkor Wat, no golden towers, no god king, just small warring kingdoms and chaos. Chapter 2. The Beginning. 802 AD, 500 years before Zhou's visit, the land that would become the Khmer Empire was in chaos. Small kingdoms, each ruled by a prince, constantly at war with one another. No unity, no stability, no future. The people were poor, and the wars never ended. The strong devoured the weak, and the weakest were doomed. The great powers around them, Java to the south, China to the north, watched hungrily, waiting to strike. In this chaos, a man named Jayavarman II emerged. We know little about his childhood. The sources are scarce, and history is unclear. But we know this. He was a young prince, possibly from a minor royal family, and he spent years of his youth in Java. Was he a prisoner, a guest, an exile? No one knows for sure. But in Java, he saw something that changed him forever. A real empire. One king ruling an entire island, an organized army, a clear system, real power. Jayavarman observed, learned, and understood something crucial. Power isn't just in the sword. The sword can subdue people temporarily, but the right idea can bind them forever. The idea that unites people behind you, that makes obedience to you a sacred duty, that makes rebellion against you an unforgivable crime. Jayavarman returned to his land with a plan. He wouldn't be just another prince fighting over a scrap of land. He would be something else entirely. He would be a god. But first, he had to prove himself with the sword. He began uniting the kingdoms, one by one. Some joined willingly, seeing in him a strong leader who knew what he wanted. Others resisted, and he forced them. The battles were many, the years long, and the bloodshed heavy. But one by one, the kingdoms fell under the rule of a single man, Jayavarman. And when the land was his, he did what he had planned from the beginning. He climbed a mountain, Mount Mahendra Parvata, the sacred mountain, with a great Hindu priest named Hiranayadama, the most learned of his time. Atop that mountain, in a secret ritual, something happened that changed history. Jayavarman declared himself King of Kings, Lord of the Universe, the living God on earth. This concept is called Devaraja, the God King. What did it mean? It meant Jayavarman wasn't just a ruler wielding a sword. He was the earthly incarnation of the god Shiva. His body housed the god's spirit. Obeying him wasn't a political duty, it was worship. To oppose him wasn't to oppose a king, it was to oppose a god. And rebellion against him wasn't treason, it was heresy. This idea was genius, as much political as it was religious. Before, princes fought because each saw himself as equal to the others. Why should I submit to you? You're just like me. Now, Jayavarman was on a different level, a divine level. Submission to him wasn't humiliation. It was closeness to the god. And so, on that day, atop the sacred mountain, the Khmer Empire was born. Jayavarman II, as he would later be known, founded the first capital, then a second, then a third. He built, moved, and experimented, searching for the perfect place. Angkor didn't exist yet. It would come later, after decades, but Jayavarman laid the foundation. A foundation that would last 600 years, the system of the God King, a unified identity and ambition. The ambition that would drive his descendants to build things the world had never seen before, and never would again. Jayavarman II ruled until his death around 850 AD. After him came many kings, some great, some weak. The capital changed several times. The empire's borders expanded and contracted. But the empire endured. It grew slowly, expanded, and prospered. Temples were built, reservoirs dug, and canals extended. 300 years passed. He didn't want to be one of many. He wanted to be the greatest. He wanted to build something that would last forever, something humanity had never built before, and never would again. Chapter 3. The Masterpiece. 1113 AD, a man named Suryavarman II ascended the throne. He didn't inherit it peacefully. The sources say he seized power through civil war, killing his uncle, the previous king, in a battle atop an elephant. Such was the way of the Khmer Empire sometimes. The throne belonged to whoever could take it. But the strange thing isn't how he came to power. It's what he did afterward. Suryavarman was ambitious beyond measure. Every king before him had built temples. It was tradition in the Khmer Empire. The king rules, the king builds a temple, the king dies. But Suryavarman didn't want an ordinary temple. He wanted something different, something never built before, and never to be built again. He wanted to build Mount Meru on Earth, the sacred mountain at the center of the Hindu cosmos, home of the gods. Suryavarman decided to build it in stone, right here, on Khmer land. He chose the site carefully, flat, vast, near the capital, with plenty of water from the massive reservoirs built by his predecessors, and enough space for his vision. Then he began. The numbers I'm about to tell you might sound exaggerated, but they're real, documented and confirmed. 300,000 workers. 300,000 people labored to build this temple, a number larger than the population of most European cities at the time. An entire city of workers dedicated to a single project. 1,000 elephants transported stone from the quarries, some 50 kilometers away. Some of these stones weighed tons. The construction took 37 years. 37 years of non-stop work. An entire generation was born at the start of the project, grew up, married, had children, and Angkor Wat was still being built. The result: the largest religious monument in human history. This isn't an exaggeration. Even today, after 900 years, no larger temple exists in the world. But size isn't everything. The real genius is in the design. The temple is a replica of the universe itself, as envisioned in Hindu mythology. At its center are 5 towers. The middle tower, the tallest, rises 65 meters high. This represents the peak of Mount Meru, the home of the gods. The 4 surrounding towers represent the lesser peaks. Around them are three enclosing walls, each higher than the last. As you ascend, you draw closer to the center, rising toward the heavens, toward the gods. And around it all is a massive moat, 190 meters wide, stretching for kilometers, 5 million cubic meters of water. This moat represents the cosmic ocean, the sea that surrounds the world in Hindu mythology. From the sky, the temple looks like an island, Mount Meru floating in the cosmic ocean. The entire universe in a single building. But the most astonishing part? The carvings. The walls of Angkor Wat aren't bare. Every centimeter is sculpted. The outer gallery alone has 800 meters of bas-reliefs, 800 meters of stories carved in stone, scenes from the Hindu epics Ramayana and Mahabharata, battles between gods and demons, and stories from Khmer history itself. Suryavarman sits on his throne. His armies march to war. His victories over enemies are immortalized. The carvings are incredibly detailed. You can see the folds of clothing, the weapons, the expressions on faces, thousands of figures, each unique. How did they do it? How did they build all this without modern technology? The answer: genius, patience, and labor. The stones were cut from quarries using a method of driving wooden wedges into cracks, soaking them in water to expand and split the rock. The stones were transported on wooden sleds pulled by elephants or hundreds of men along specially built roads. The stones were lifted using earth ramen. As the temple grew taller, so did the ramps. It was slow, grueling work, but it was effective. The carvings? Artists who spent their entire lives perfecting their craft, serving this temple. Suryavarman II never saw his temple completed. He died before its finish, around 1150 AD. But the temple was completed after him and has stood for 900 years, the greatest architectural achievement in Southeast Asian history, the largest religious structure on Earth, and the eternal symbol of the Khmer Empire. But the empire itself wasn't safe. After Suryavarman's death, things began to change. The kings who followed weren't as strong. Power struggles erupted, weakness spread, and chaos took hold. And worse, an old enemy was watching from afar, waiting for the right moment. The Cham Kingdom on the eastern coast, the Khmer's green-skinned neighbors. Chapter 4. The Catastrophe. 1177 AD, 27 years after Suryavarman II's death, the Khmer Empire was in a difficult period. The current king, Tribhuvanadityavarman, was weak. Internal power struggles raged, the army was scattered, and attention was divided. On the eastern coast, the Cham were watching. The Cham were a different people, seafaring with a powerful navy and skilled sailors. The Khmer and the Cham had a long history of enmity, with wars spanning centuries. Sometimes the Khmer won, sometimes the Cham won. But what happened in 1177 was different. The Cham king Jaya Indravarman IV decided on a bold move. He wouldn't just attack the borders as usual. He would strike at the heart. He would attack the capital. But how? The capital was deep inland, far from the coast, protected by forests and distance. The answer? By water. Jaya Indravarman assembled a massive fleet, hundreds of ships, thousands of warriors. Then he did something no one expected. Instead of attacking from the coast, he sailed north, looped around, and entered the Mekong River, moving inland. The river was an open path. No one anticipated an attack from this direction. There were no forts on the river, no armies guarding it. The fleet slipped through in silence, weeks of sailing into enemy territory, undetected until they reached Tonle Sap, the great lake at the heart of the Khmer Empire. The capital, Yasodharapura, lay on its shores. The surprise was total. The Khmer had no idea an army was coming. They had no warships ready. The army was scattered across the empire. King Tribhuvanadityavarman rushed to meet the invaders with whatever forces he could gather. The battle took place on the lake, a naval battle, the Khmer's few ships against the Cham's vast fleet. The result? Disaster. King Tribhuvanadityavarman was killed in battle, along with most of his guards. Ships sank or burned. The capital was now defenseless. Jaya Indravarman entered Yasodharapura victorious. What followed was horror, looting. Everything of value was stolen. Gold from the temples, jewels from the palaces, sacred statues. Then, fire. Palaces burned, homes burned. Smoke filled the sky for days. The killing. We don't know how many died, but the sources speak of a massacre. Enslavement, thousands were taken captive, men, women, and children, chained and marched to Cham. The Khmer Empire, the empire that built Angkor Wat, fell. The capital was occupied, the king dead, the army destroyed. It seemed like the end. 600 years of glory gone in a single day. But somewhere far from the capital, there was a man, a royal prince named Jayavarman VII. He was 70 years old, an age at which most men retire. But he wasn't ready to surrender. Chapter 5. The Hero, Jayavarman VII. Remember this name well, for he would become the greatest king in Khmer history. When the capital fell in 1177, Jayavarman was away, perhaps on a military campaign, perhaps in a distant region. We don't know exactly, but we do know he wasn't in the city when it fell, and that saved his life. The news reached him. The king was dead. The capital had fallen. The Cham occupied the heart of the empire. What would you do in his place? A 70-year-old man, his empire in ruins, his army destroyed, the enemy victorious. Many would have surrendered, fled, hidden, and waited for death. Jayavarman did none of that. He began gathering what remained, soldiers who had escaped the battle, princes in distant regions who hadn't yet fallen, ordinary men who wanted to reclaim their land. One by one, group by group, he built an army from scratch. 4 years of recruiting, training, and waiting. During this time, the Cham occupied the capital, thinking they had won, thinking the Khmer Empire was over. They were wrong. 1181 AD, Jayavarman was ready. The battle took place on Tonle Sap, the same spot where the previous king had fallen. A naval battle, but this time, the outcome was different. Jayavarman led his army himself, a 70-year-old man at the front of the troops. The battle was fierce. Sources speak of fighting that lasted an entire day. Ships burning, men drowning, the lake's waters stained with blood. But in the end, Jayavarman won. The Cham were defeated and fled. Those who survived escaped back to their homeland. The capital was liberated after 4 years of occupation, and Jayavarman VII became the new king of the Khmer Empire. But he didn't stop at liberation. He wanted revenge. 1190 AD, 9 years after freeing the capital, Jayavarman invaded the Cham kingdom itself. He didn't just defend. He attacked them on their own land, conquered their capital, and subjugated their kingdom. The Cham, who had been a nightmare, became part of the Khmer Empire. Revenge was complete. But Jayavarman VII didn't stop there. This man wasn't just a warrior, he was a great builder. After the war, he launched the largest construction project in Khmer history. The first thing he built? A new capital, Angkor Wat, the great city. The old capital had been destroyed in the invasion, so Jayavarman decided to build one even greater. Its walls stretched 12 kilometers, enclosing an area of 9 square kilometers, larger than most cities in the world at the time. 5 massive gates, each topped with a giant stone face, smiling. These faces would become the symbol of Angkor forever. At the city's center, he built the Bayon Temple, a strange, otherworldly temple, unlike Angkor Wat. Instead of pointed towers, its towers were covered in faces. 45 towers, each with 4 giant faces. 216 faces in total, smiling in every direction. Some say these are the faces of the Buddha, for Jayavarman, unlike the kings before him, was Buddhist, not Hindu. Others say they are his own face, the god-king watching over his realm from every angle. Perhaps both. The king who became Buddha, or the Buddha who bore the king's features. But Jayavarman didn't just build temples. He built 102 hospitals across the empire, not just for the rich, but for everyone. This number is staggering. In Europe at the time, nothing like this existed. An organized healthcare system covering an entire empire. He built 121 rest houses along the roads for travelers, merchants, and pilgrims. He constructed a network of roads connecting the empire, with paved highways and bridges over rivers. He expanded the water system, new reservoirs, new canals, the lifeblood of the land. All of this was built by a man who came to the throne in his 60s. There's a famous inscription attributed to Jayavarman VII, words found by archaeologists on one of the temples. "The suffering of my people is my suffering. Their happiness is my happiness." Maybe it was royal propaganda. Kings always say beautiful things, but his actions suggest he meant it. The hospitals, roads, and rest houses weren't built for himself. They were built for the people. Jayavarman VII ruled until around 1218 AD, nearly 40 years. He died at over 90 years old, leaving behind an empire greater and stronger than he found it. He left behind cities, temples, and hospitals, an unforgettable legacy, the greatest king in Khmer history. But after his death, something began to change, something no one noticed at first, something slow, hidden, deadly, the secret that would kill the empire. Chapter 6. The Killer Secret. What kills empires? Historians have asked this question 1,000 times about Rome, the pharaohs, Babylon, every great civilization that fell. Sometimes the answer is obvious, an invading army, a plague, a revolution. But sometimes the answer is stranger. Sometimes the very thing that builds you is the thing that destroys you. The Khmer Empire didn't fall because of invasions alone. It didn't fall because of revolts alone. It fell because the water that made it great also destroyed it. Let me explain. The Khmer Empire was built in a difficult place. Southeast Asia, with its tropical climate, monsoon rains so heavy they flood everything, followed by long dry seasons where not a drop falls. During the monsoon, the rains don't stop for months. Rivers overflow, the land floods, and everything swims in water. During the dry season, the opposite happens. Rivers dry up, the earth cracks, and plants wither. This extreme contrast makes agriculture very difficult. Most civilizations in the region grew rice once a year. Wait for the monsoon, plant, harvest, then wait for the next year. But the Khmer did something different. They built a massive hydraulic system, simple in concept, but miraculous in execution. The idea? Collect water during the monsoon, store it, and use it in the dry season. A simple idea, but its implementation was an engineering marvel. They built giant reservoirs called barrays, not small ponds, but artificial lakes. Some of the largest water structures built by humans before the modern era. The East Barray, one of the oldest, was 7 kilometers long, 2 kilometers wide, and held 37 million cubic meters of water. The West Barray was even larger, 8 kilometers long, 2 kilometers wide, holding 48 million cubic meters, enough to fill millions of Olympic-sized swimming pools. An entire lake built by human hands. How did they do it? With hands and simple tools. Thousands of workers dug for years. They built earthen dams around the reservoir to hold the water. Then they connected the reservoirs with a network of canals, the most important part of the system. Imagine a circulatory system. The reservoirs were the heart, and the canals were the veins, carrying water to every part of the body. Main canals, dozens of meters wide, branched into smaller canals, then even smaller ones, until they reached every field in the empire. In total, over 1,500 kilometers of canals, the distance from Cairo to Khartoum, a water network of this scale, built by human hands. And there was another brilliant detail. The land around Angkor isn't completely flat. There's a slight slope from north to south. The engineers used this slope. The reservoirs were built in the north, at the higher elevation, and the fields in the south, at the lower elevation. Water flowed by gravity, no pumps needed. Just open the gate, and the water moves on its own. A simple, smart, effective system. What did this system achieve? It changed everything. Other farmers in the region grew rice once a year. The Khmer grew it, Dao Siu 3 times a year, sometimes 4, because water was always available. Monsoon season, water from the sky. Dry season, water from the reservoirs. 3 times the harvest, 3 times the food, 3 times the people who could be fed. This surplus allowed for everything. The construction of temples, because there was enough food to feed 300,000 workers. The raising of armies, because there were enough men who didn't need to farm. The growth of the city, because there was enough rice to feed 1 million people. The water system was the true secret of Khmer greatness. Not the armies, not the temples, the water. But this brilliant system came at a price they didn't realize at first, a price that only became apparent after centuries. The system required constant maintenance that never stopped. Every year, the canals filled with silt. Monsoon waters carried mud from the mountains, which settled in the canals, narrowing them and slowing the flow. If the canals weren't cleaned, they clogged. One artery, then another, until the whole system stopped. The dams weakened over time. Water eroded them. Roots penetrated them. Rats burrowed into them. If the dams weren't repaired, they collapsed. And when a dam collapsed, the stored water was lost, and the areas below flooded. The reservoirs themselves needed cleaning. Silt built up at the bottom, year after year, making them shallower, holding less water. All of this required workers, thousands of workers, working year-round, cleaning, repairing, maintaining. Under strong kings, this happened. The king ordered, the workers labored, and the system continued. But what happens when the king weakens? What happens when the empire weakens? After Jayavarman VII, weakness began. Jayavarman VII died around 1218 AD. The kings who followed weren't as strong. They fought among themselves, coups, assassinations, small civil wars. Each king was busy securing his rule, fighting internal enemies, struggling to survive. Who would take care of cleaning the canals? Who would order the dams repaired? Slowly, neglect set in. Not deliberate, but gradual. This year, we'll postpone the repairs. Next year, we'll postpone again. And the system began to decay. But this wasn't the worst of it. The worst came from the sky. In the 14th century, something strange began to happen, something no one understood at the time. The climate changed. Yes, climate change isn't a modern invention. It has happened many times throughout history. How do we know the climate changed 700 years ago? Scientists studied ancient trees that lived during that time and are still alive today, or trees that died but whose wood remained. Every year, a tree adds a new ring to its trunk. If you cut the tree, you see the rings. Each one represents a year. The width of the ring tells you about the weather that year. A wide ring means a wet year. The tree grew a lot. A narrow ring means a dry year. The tree barely grew. Scientists studied trees from Southeast Asia, some hundreds of years old, and reconstructed the climate history. What did they find? In the mid-14th century, a period of severe drought began, a drought that lasted for decades. Not a one-year drought, but 20, 30 years of unrelenting dryness. The rains decreased dramatically. The reservoirs didn't fill as they used to. The canals began to dry up. Then, after the long drought, the opposite happened. Years of extremely heavy rains, stronger than anything they were used to. Devastating floods. The floods destroyed the canals. Torrents carried tons of silt and dumped it into the reservoirs. The weakened dams collapsed. Then another drought. Then more floods. A mad cycle of climatic extremes. The water system wasn't designed for this. It was built for a stable climate. Moderate rainy season, moderate dry season. But the climate was no longer stable. It had become violent, and the system began to fail. It didn't collapse all at once. It failed slowly, piece by piece. A canal clogged here. The farmers around it lost their water. Their crops failed, and they left. A dam collapsed there. The reservoir behind it emptied, and the villages that depended on it died. The problem compounded. A clogged canal put more pressure on the others. A collapsed dam meant less water for everyone. And the weak empire couldn't fix it. The warring kings didn't have the time, the money, or the workers. The system continued to crumble. The result? Famine. Rice was no longer produced in the old quantities. 3 harvests a year became 2, then 1, then in some places, nothing. People began to starve, not the starvation of a week or a month, but years of hunger, repeated famines. People began to die, and people began to leave. Those who couldn't farm couldn't live. Families abandoned their villages, searching for places with water, with food. The outlying villages emptied first, where the water system was weakest, then the closer areas, then closer still. The empire was shrinking slowly, like a piece of paper burning from the edges toward the center. But that wasn't all. There was something else waiting in the west. The kingdom of Ayutthaya. Ayutthaya was a new kingdom, founded in 1351 AD in what is now Thailand. A young, ambitious, fast-growing kingdom. And the Khmer? An old, tired, dying empire. The relationship between the two had always been hostile. Raids across the border, small battles, captives taken from both sides. But Ayutthaya was watching the Khmer weaken, watching the famines, watching the chaos, and waiting. The kings of Ayutthaya knew time was on their side. Every year the Khmer grew weaker. Every year, Ayutthaya grew stronger. The raids became more frequent, deeper into Khmer territory. 1301 AD, a major attack on the Khmer. 1393 AD, another attack. Of 1400 AD, a third. Each time, Ayutthaya took loot and captives and returned. Each time, the Khmer were too weak to respond. The empire was bleeding, from the inside, due to climate and famine, from the outside, due to Ayutthaya's raids. Then came 1431 AD, the year that changed everything. Chapter 7. The Fall. A 1431 AD. 3 centuries had passed since Zhou Daguan and his memoirs. 3 centuries since he described the great city, the golden towers, the king on the white elephant, the bustling markets. Now, the city was very different. Angkor was no longer what it once was. The population was much smaller. Many had left due to famine, many had died. The canals, many were dry or clogged. The fields that were once green were now abandoned. The army was weak, the treasury empty, morale shattered. The king at the time was named Ponhea. We don't know much about him. Sources from that period are very scarce. But we do know he faced an impossible situation. An empire collapsing on all sides and an enemy approaching. That year, Ayutthaya decided the time had come. Not for another raid, not for a quick strike and retreat. The time had come for the final blow. The army of Ayutthaya marched on Angkor. We don't have exact numbers on the size of the army, the sources don't say. But we know it was large enough to besiege the greatest city in the region. The army reached the walls of Angkor, and the siege began. A siege in the Middle Ages wasn't like modern battles. There was no artillery bombardment, no airplanes, no technology for quick penetration. A siege meant waiting. Surround the city, prevent food from entering, prevent people from leaving, and wait. Wait until those inside starve. Wait until they despair. Wait until they surrender or die. The siege of Angkor lasted 7 months, 210 days. Imagine what that meant for those inside. At first, there may have been hope. Maybe an army would come from somewhere to save them. Maybe the enemy would grow tired and leave. Maybe something would happen. But the weeks passed, and no one came. The food began to run out. Angkor was a huge city. Even after everything, there were still thousands of people inside. All of them needed food, every day. The supplies dwindled, prices soared. Those who ate 3 meals a day now ate 2, then 1, then less. The weakest began to die first. Children, the elderly, the sick. 2 months, 3. Hunger does terrible things to people. It changes them. Neighbors who were once friends fought over a piece of bread. Families fell apart. Morale collapsed. 5 months, 6. No one was coming to save them. The empire was too weak. The armies on the outskirts couldn't reach them, or didn't want to. King Ponhea watched his kingdom die before his eyes. What could he do? Surrender? Fight to the death? Flee? He chose the third option. At some point, before the final fall, the king escaped. We don't know the details. Did he flee at night? Did he force his way out? Did he bribe some of the besiegers? We don't know. But we do know he left the city, taking his court and as many as he could with him. He headed south, far from Angkor, far from Ayutthaya, to a region called Phnom Penh. Phnom Penh was just a small village at the time, on the Mekong River, closer to the sea, closer to maritime trade. The king chose it as his new capital. He never returned to Angkor. Ponhea was the last king to rule from Angkor. After him, the Khmer center of power moved south, and Angkor fell. The army of Ayutthaya entered the city. What did they do? They looted everything of value. The gold from the temples, the bronze statues, the jewels from the palaces, the silk and fine fabrics. Cartloads of treasure left Angkor, heading west toward Ayutthaya. And the people who remained in the city. Some were taken captive, especially the skilled workers, stonemasons, metal workers, dancers. Ayutthaya wanted their skills and took them to their capital to work there. Much of modern Thai culture, royal dances, sculpting styles, royal traditions, originated from these Khmer captives. Some people stayed, not everyone left. Ayutthaya didn't want Angkor as a capital. It was too far from their lands, too difficult to defend. They took what they wanted and left. But the city after them was no longer the same. The king was gone, the court was gone, the treasures were looted, the system had collapsed. Who would stay, and why? People began to leave, not all at once, but slowly, over years, over decades. One family decided to follow the king to the south. Another went somewhere else with water and food. A third searched for relatives in a distant village. One by one, the temples emptied of priests. Who would pay them? Who would feed them? The palaces emptied of people. The markets emptied of merchants. The streets emptied of life. Year after year, only a few remained. The poor who had nowhere else to go. The monks who refused to abandon their temples. The villagers around the city. But their numbers dwindled, and the city began to die. The wooden houses rotted. The humidity of the tropical jungle decayed the wood. A roof collapsed here. A wall fell there. The streets, once clean, were overgrown with grass. The squares, once bustling, were choked with bushes. The canals, no one cleaned them now. Silt built up. The water stopped. The beautiful pools that once surrounded the temples became swamps, then dried up. And the jungle began to advance. The tropical jungle doesn't wait. It doesn't show mercy. It doesn't stop. At first, grass grew in every crack between the stones, small, seemingly unimportant. But it was only the beginning. Then came the shrubs, their roots pushing into the cracks, widening them, breaking the stones. Then came the trees, small at first, seeds sprouting in a crevice, then growing. Their roots wrapped around the walls like fingers, penetrating every gap. The tree grew, the roots grew, the pressure increased. The stones shifted from their places, the walls cracked, the roofs collapsed. A single tree could destroy an entire building, slowly, over decades. And there were thousands of trees. The jungle crawled over the city, swallowed it stone by stone, building by building. The wooden palaces disappeared first, rotting away until nothing was left. The stone temples lasted longer, but the jungle attacked them too. 100 years passed, and the roads vanished under the trees. 200 years, and many of the smaller buildings collapsed. 300 years, and the city became part of the jungle, almost indistinguishable. 400 years, and Angkor was gone. Not completely. The local people knew it was there. Hunters passing through the area, monks visiting some of the temples, villagers living nearby. But the outside world forgot. Europe never heard of this city. China forgot. Even though Zhou Daguan was Chinese, the Arabs didn't know. The greatest city built by humanity before the modern era became a jungle. Then, in 1860, a Frenchman named Henri Mouhot arrived. Mouhot wasn't a professional explorer. He was a naturalist who collected butterflies and insects. He came to Southeast Asia to gather specimens and heard from the locals about ruins in the jungle. He went to see and stood stunned. Giant stone faces smiled at him from the roots. Towers pierced the treetops. Walls carved with thousands of images. An entire city, hidden in the jungle, forgotten for centuries. Henri Mouhot didn't discover Angkor in the true sense. The locals had always known about it, but he told the world. His writings were published after his death. He died of malaria a year later, at just 35 years old. But his accounts changed everything. The world discovered that there was a lost civilization, wonders buried in the jungle, mysteries waiting to be solved. Researchers came, especially the French, as Cambodia became a French colony. They began excavating, removing trees from the temples, restoring the collapsed structures. Slowly, Angkor re-emerged. Today, Angkor Wat is one of the most famous landmarks in the world. Millions visit it every year. It's on the Cambodian flag, a symbol of the nation, a source of pride for its people. But the questions remain. How did they build all this? How did they manage a city of 1 million people without modern technology? Why did they leave so suddenly? We've found some answers. The brilliant water system, climate change, the invasions of Ayutthaya. But many mysteries remain, buried like the stones under the trees, waiting to be uncovered. Chapter 8. The Jungle Triumphs. When humans leave, nature returns. The tropical jungle is merciless. At first, grass grows in the cracks between the stones, small, seemingly insignificant. Then come the shrubs, their roots pushing into the cracks, widening them. Then come the trees, massive trees with strong roots that grow along the walls, twisting into every gap, every opening. The roots lift the stones from their places, topple the roofs, split the walls, and the jungle spreads, not in a year or 10, but over centuries. 100 years, and the jungle covers the roads. 100 years, and the jungle swallows the palaces. 300 years, and the jungle hides the temples. 400 years, and nothing is visible except the tallest towers. Angkor disappeared, not completely. The local people knew it was there. Hunters passed through it. Monks visited some of the temples. Villagers lived around it. But the world forgot. Europeans had never heard of it. The Arabs had never heard of it. Even most Asians had never heard of it. The city of 1 million people became a forgotten legend, if anyone had heard of it at all. Until a Frenchman came in 1860, Henri Mouhot. Mouhot wasn't a professional explorer. He was a naturalist who collected butterflies and insects. He came to Southeast Asia to gather specimens and heard from the locals about ruins in the jungle. He went to see and was shocked. Stone towers piercing the treetops, giant faces smiling from the roots, temples larger than anything in Europe. He wrote in his journal, one of these temples might rival that of Solomon and was built by some ancient Michelangelo. Henri Mouhot didn't discover Angkor. The locals had always known about it, but he told the world. His writings were published in Europe, his drawings spread, and the world discovered that there was a forgotten civilization in the jungles of Cambodia. Henri Mouhot died a year later. Malaria killed him. He was only 35 years old and never saw the impact of his discovery. But researchers came after him, especially the French, as Cambodia became a French colony. They began excavating, restoring, studying. They removed trees from the temples, rebuilt the collapsed structures, and slowly, Angkor reappeared. Today, Angkor Wat is one of the most famous landmarks in the world. Millions of tourists visit it every year. It's on the Cambodian flag, its image recognized worldwide. But the questions remain. How did a jungle people build all this? How did they manage 1 million lives without modern technology? And why did they leave it all behind? We've found some answers. The brilliant water system, climate change, the invasions of Ayutthaya. But many questions remain unanswered. The writing they left behind is sparse, mostly religious. We know little about their daily lives. If it weren't for Zhou Daguan, the Chinese diplomat who visited in 1296, we would know almost nothing. His report is the only surviving eyewitness account of the city in its prime. My personal take, I think the story of the Khmer is a reminder of the fragility of everything. We think what we build will last forever, but time doesn't care, and the jungle doesn't care. What truly remains isn't the stones. It's the impact we leave on the lives of others. The hospitals Jayavarman 7 built helped thousands. Even if not a single stone remains, that's what matters. If you enjoyed this journey, subscribe to the channel. And with that, Tota Tota, the story is over. 10:59 p.m. Data Radic Scroll Area, Viewport. Scroll bar width, da none. Ems overflow. Style, da none. WebKit overflow. Scrolling, touch. Data Radic scroll. Area, viewport. WebKit scroll bar. Display, none.